Well, I'm delighted to have John Robb back on the programme. Loved having him last time. He's got a million and one things to say, but we don't do 5-hour podcasts. So these are condensed to like half an hour. But John, willing, will be back several times over the coming however long I'm doing this. John, last time we obviously were, I refer myself to an adopted Manc, but always an adopted Yank, always a Manc. So I'm always kind of interested in hearing stories about my old town, even though I've been out there 20 years. We spoke about the Stone Roses, which we both have a great affection for. And I think it's fair to say we were both there in the very early stages and kind of, I always look back and we spoke about, the late, great Pete Garner when, he used to meet me outside the radio station at I think I was on at 10 o'clock at night then, to give me a cassette, very courteous and polite and thing. We're all hustlers, but it's how you hustle and things. But I wanted to just go back into kind of, the first time you saw them, how many people were kind of, how many people were at the gig and where was it?
Well, actually, yeah, first time I saw them was when they were rehearsing next door to us.
Sorry, you told me that, yeah.
Yeah. We could pick it up from there at Spirit Studios, which I was reading the other day, the one in Chorlton, behind the garage was the garage where George Best used to get his petrol from when he went to go and train for Man United in the 60s. So I didn't have this added little piece of pop cultural history to it. So I seen him there, and I've seen him with Pete playing him. I think I've seen him at the gallery. I've seen him at the International, and I saw Manny's first gig at the International as well. So, I've seen him a lot of things, and I've seen him around at gigs as well, because they didn't often go to a lot of gigs. But I think it was a Plain Jane gig I saw them at. It's really hard to remember the order of all this stuff, because they didn't really play Manchester a lot at first. Then they did a bunch of sort of weird supports, and then sort of disappeared again, didn't they?
But you saw them with Pete because you just met
the internationals, didn't they? When Gareth started managing them.
Yeah, because you mentioned it's the first time you saw him with Manny. Well, you saw him with Pete Garner as well, did you?
Yeah.
Great, the original lineup.
Yeah, and then Pete was great. And Pete was the first one I knew. I knew Pete from back in Paper Chase in Manchester when he's come and bring my fanzine in. And I used to try and, you used to take your fanzine out around shops around the country. That was a primitive distribution method. And Pete took the fanzines, and we always talked about music. And he was a good, massive music head. And he was the first person I really got to know really well in Manchester. So when we rehearsed next door to him and I broke a string, I had to go in the room, and I didn't know Pete was actually in them, but they hadn't twigged the band he was talking about that he was in. I didn't realise it was the band that was in next door, and they looked a bit surly, and I thought, oh God, this is gonna be a bit of a standoff here to go and get a string. But they were dead nice. Of course they're nice, aren't they? And then I saw Pete, I thought, fucking hell, is this your band, Pete? I just didn't realise it was the same bunch of people.
It's funny though, going back to those days, John. Because I was very much into the kind of, the Paisley Underground stuff and things, and a lot of those emerging bands. Because I got What's Going On records in Australia and New Zealand and stuff, bands like the Celibate Rifles and the Dead, the Long Riders, they signed to Island Records anyway. But I thought that, there are two bands that through my long years, I always thought could have exploded in America, but they didn't have the infrastructure around them to happen. One was the Chameleons. Right, because that type of guitar sound would have gone down phenomenal, and they could have played built their way up like a lot of bands had done organically. And the other one was the Stone Roses. And am I right in thinking? I remember Gareth Evans in my office saying to me, I said, when are you going to take them to the States? And he said, we're only going to go when we're as big as the Beatles. And I looked at him, I said, you're delusional. Nobody's going to be as big as the Beatles. Get real, And I just think that the fact that so much went on to not so much destroy them, but wasn't the first gig they did Madison Square Garden or something when they reformed?
It wasn't the first gig, but they did it. They got round to playing it in the end, and they sold it out, didn't they?
They did.
I think was it Mick Jagger once said though, when people said about the Stones being as big as the Beatles, you can't. The Beatles are a phenomenon, they're not. That doesn't even count. It got so big.
Exactly.
The Rolling Stones, technically the biggest band of the 60s, because the Beatles were not a band. They were just a completely different thing, weren't they? They're a cultural force. I mean, it's not fair to expect any band to get... There's a whole range of factors which will never exist again.
Exactly.
And plus, they were completely genius band. It was a different period of time, now any band... coming out, it's competing with 70 years of rock history. You know, there's, you know, the Beatles are just competing with Elvis, you know, and that was it, you know, whereas there's more space and they were brilliant. So it's an unfair comparison. But the Roses, as we all know, I don't think they even got to a tenth of the size they could have got to, you know. They never toured America at their peak, you know. If they got to America, you know, they didn't get to America till the second coming. They'd been there in the first place. But Gareth, I mean, despite he didn't really know what he was doing, and despite the massive fallout with the band, that thing of holding out, which is probably the band's idea anyway, and they didn't go to America. They were never going to go to America and slog around the little venues and build it up. The idea was to go in at Madison Square Gardens and start at the top, wasn't it? And it's ballsy if you could pull it off. I think if they hadn't imploded and they had Geffen behind them, the whole thing would have they would have been big, you know. It's really, who knows how big anything ever gets. You know, they probably like Oasis. You know, Oasis did break America to a certain level. People forget that Wonderwall was number 2. They had top 5 albums, and Oasis could sell out Madison Square Gardens right in the career.
We
I think
discussed that, yeah.
like that, really, wouldn't they? A bit of massive cult
sorry.
band, you know, not Bruce Springsteen, but a band that could do, you know, 10, 20,000 New York, LA, and about 3,000-4,000 every city in the middle.
Not Bruce Springsteen, but being able to connect with an audience in the same way, of that kind of, you don't look like you're in a big arena. I mean, I get a bit nerdy about these things. I always say I was really lucky. You know, I wanted to thank my mother for giving me birth when she did, because everybody who ever meant anything to me, I saw in under 2,000 seaters. And as we go to Springsteen, I remember I went to see him in 2005, just after I'd emigrated, and I saw him in the Tampa Bay you know, big venue. But these aren't venues that are built for music. They're either football fields, there's no acoustics and stuff. And I'm watching Springsteen, who I've always liked, and I'm watching him on the screen at the side. And I know it's Bruce Springsteen because I know the songs and it's on the ticket. And I'm thinking, why am I here? I saw him like on the first row of the Circle at the Apollo for 2 nights in Manchester and stuff. And I was fortunate to grow up like that. But going back to the Roses and stuff, I mean, obviously Howard Jones, who was managing the Hacienda, was the first person who told me about them. And I never forget taking that that cassette in and playing it and copying it to reel, and thinking, I had Paula Greenwood and Ro Newton that were helping me on my program, the last radio program back in the day. And we both looked at each other and thought, oh my God, you know, and I still have that session. I think somebody put it on YouTube, and, you know, with I Want to Be Adored and stuff. And I think that was their first American single 6 years later. But I don't know. The thing I love about bands like the Roses is, and I remember Rick Rubin, no, not Rick Rubin, can't remember who it was, but he came out with something about, he was talking about Adele, and he said that the great thing about Adele is this record could have come out today, or it come out 10 years ago, or 10 years from now, and it would still sound the same. And I think that resonates with the Roses. That's a timeless record for me. You know, I like the Second Coming, but for me, kind of, you know, it was like waiting and waiting and waiting. But that first album was as good a first album as I'd ever heard.
Oh, it's a perfect first album, isn't it? I mean, there's not a note on it you could change, is there? It's the sound of it, the songs, the lyrics, every single part of it is absolutely perfect. It's one of the great classic albums, and one of the 20 great albums that come out of the UK ever, really, isn't it? You know,
exactly.
You know, like Revolved by the Beatles, just perfect. Every track, the order of the tracks, the artwork, everything is perfect. You know, oddly though, the Second Coming is a really great record as well. It was just whereas the first album didn't come out at the right time either. That's the other thing you always forget. It came out and a lot of people didn't get it. The NME gave it a sniffy little review. Didn't really crash in at number 1 on the charts. It sort of built up slowly, didn't it?
Yeah.
But when the second album came out, because they waited so long, the expectation was so high, and Oasis had come in and kind of stolen the thunder. It was almost too late. They almost like missed their own bandwagon. Although that album has done, over the years, has sold a fuck of a lot of copies, hasn't
it? Yeah. There's always kind of one act that kind of starts it off. I think in a way, you know, even the Spice Girls benefited from Take That. You know, there's like a boy band, and then there's 10,000 boy bands, because that's what happens in the music industry. Going back to like those days with the Roses and stuff, and I think like, you know, you know, when you spoke to Ian, that long chat you had with him that's on YouTube. Like you said, it was for the book you wrote and everything. But it was amazing to think that they had that opportunity to play like the smaller venues, which is what you should do. I mean, I was there with you too. They were playing shitholes to 30 people. I saw them playing that pub in Manchester to like 12 people, and 4 of them were with me. But you build a following and you work your way through. And they didn't have social media. But I always say to people now, there might be the next U2 out there, but we'll never find out about them, which takes me into your interview that you did with the BBC. And the other guy and that girl who was with her husband had that venue. And I was just dumbfounded by the amount of venues that had closed down and stuff, because there aren't the opportunities now. And Live
Oh,
Nation and places are
no, I
just...
don't agree. There's more venues now than there ever has been.
No, I meant small venues that are closing.
No, there's more small venues. Manchester's full of small venues. I mean,
Oh, really? Tell me more.
there's a bit of mythology about this, I think. And I don't think it's easy running a venue, and there's lots of things that should be changed to make, because they are really important cultural spaces. The VAT ruling that needs looking at. They need support, but like back when you were living in Manchester, there's probably about 5, 6 small venues in the city centre. There's probably about 50 now.
There's
So
what?
There's loads of small venues, about 50 odd.
So how many capacity are we looking at then?
100 up to about 500, and I'm not even counting all the arenas. There's huge arenas and things as well. So there's a lot more people go to. I was just thinking about this the other day. When they opened the Hacienda, and it was too big, wasn't it? It's the alternative venue managed to hold 1,500 people, but there weren't 1,500 people into alternative music in Manchester at the time. Whereas now, because alternatives become mainstream. Going to a gig, going to see an indie band, whatever, is not really like back in that time in the 80s. It was a very underground thing to do, but now it's just part of the culture, isn't it? So it's. I don't think you can compare them. I think they're very different kind of eras. But it doesn't make it easier. I mean, there's more bands now. There's more bands than ever has been. So it's a bit of a squeeze out there, and it's harder to be in a band because you can't get as far, and financially it's difficult as well. So only probably tend to be more posher kids tend to be in bands because the parents support them. But there are places to play. There's lots of places to play.
That's really interesting, because having watched the thing, I mean, I saw that on the BBC they were talking about 120 venues closing this year. So is Manchester an exception to the rule, you think?
Well, I thought that was, and I put that on my socials, and someone in Newcastle said, "Oh, we got loads of new venues here as well." And yeah, I mean, venues are, of course, yeah, there are 120 venues closed last year, and it was sad when Bath Mole's closed. I played there; it was a brilliant venue. I played there a few times. But then there's always been a turnover of venues, from the Cavern onwards, venues are closed down. And venues closed for lots of different reasons. So like the Roadhouse in Manchester closed after years, closed about 10 years ago. But that's because the people who ran it didn't want to run a venue anymore.
A Night and Day in places like that still open?
Yes, 9 days still there. Yeah, after all that fuss, it's still going, and it's still there. Down in the Northern Quarter's full of like venues, small venues. There's venues that people don't even mention. There's a venue called Rebellion near me where they put loads of rock and punk bands on. I mean, that never existed in the 80s, spaces like that. So there's a lot of spaces to play in Manchester. But I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do to run a venue, but somehow people are making them, somehow people are running venues.
Yeah, the interesting thing as well is if we overlap that into the music industry, obviously I was kind of full on back in the time we're talking about. But, for instance, when U2 signed to Island Records, they didn't sign for the biggest advance. I mean, nobody wanted to sign them anyway, so they're the only label on the table. But the fact of the matter is, they got I think something like a 50 grand advance, but they got tour support. And even to the extent that they owed Ireland like $500,000 in recoupable stuff, and they waited for them. There was that relationship with the label, and to the extent of when Ireland had financial problems, they owed U2 $1 million in unpaid royalties, and Ireland said, "Fine, wait." There was that kind of camaraderie, if you like. And I think the thing is, but what I'm saying is, when you put a wad of cash into a band that is what we call emerging talent, that allows you to go and get a van and go and drive to venues and stay in a motel for £40 or something like that. That gives you a way to build your audience. The rest is down to you, but the record companies supported them.
Yeah, well, I mean, tour support was useful in the 80s, but there's only those major label bands got it. I mean, all of the bands like my band, we never had any tour support. I was reading this article in The Guardian the other day about how difficult it is to tour being in a band. And they're interviewing this band, and this band was saying, people have to realize it's really difficult taking a crew of 5 people and staying in hotels, and that costs a lot of money. And I was thinking, well, in the 80s, we didn't have a crew. We just carried our own gear, sold our own t-shirts, drove our own van, and slept on the promoter's floor. I'm not saying that's the ideal way of touring, but that was actually the practicality of touring. Most of those gigs there were all about 50 quid, and you had to squeeze. I know the cost of living's gone up with everything.
Yeah.
You had to squeeze your van and everything out of 50 quid and make it work. And that's what you did. You didn't go, we're getting 50 quid, so let's go and get 5 roadies, and it'll cost us loads of money to do. You couldn't do that. You had no choice. You had to work within your budget. And I get the feeling, some of these bands they're talking to think, to be in a proper band, the idea of a proper band is to have a crew and a big fancy truck to go around in. And really, the practical for most musicians forever, if you go right back to the 60s, and people like Bruce Mitchell or someone, but they're all going around in transit vans. At least we didn't have that bit, or we had the tail end of that bit. But it was, you do the gig and drive back home, even if you got back in at 4 in, or you sleep in floors. I mean, that was, what's the American hardcore bands call it? Traveling.
Yeah.
Econo. The Minutemen wrote a book about it, Black Flag, but Black Flag basically created the book. They would do these relentless tours of just like driving 10, 15 hours, play the gig, sleep on top of the gear in the van, and go to the next gig. I mean, it's not nice, it's horrible, but it doesn't mean stuff can't happen just because you're not getting paid. In the end of the day, if you're playing a gig and there's 30 people there, where's the money going to come from? People may not actually like your music that much, but the 30 people who turn up really like it. So it is valid. But so how do you make that work? You can't sit there and go, it's not fair. I can't get a crew of 5 people to work for me. You have to think, it's only 30 people. I've got to work within the parameters I've been given.
Well, that's really interesting, because I saw that firsthand with you too. I mean, I call it paying your dues. I mean, for instance, I'd go back to just what you said, exactly the same just then. In their early days, just when they'd signed, it was the equivalent of a long wheelbase transit, albeit a transit, with the tour manager driving, with the equipment in the back and the band squeezed in between. And they would leave a gig, say play Manchester, and then they would drive overnight, check into a motel, 4 in a room, maybe 2 rooms if they were lucky. I'd be getting up to take them into some tiny little radio station, wherever I could get them. And then they'd have a sound check, and they'd have like a gig, and then the same again, and rolling it out. Now, it's easy to say that now when you look at the size and the stature of the band. But, a lot of the bands paid their dues and worked their way up like that. And if I was a musician, I'd like to look back on that and think, we've earned this,
I'm not saying that's the ideal model. I wish it was like I'm
That's more a history lesson.
Oh, the good old days when we used to sleep on people's floors.
Yeah.
It was because it was shitty, but it was just working with what you had, really. I think, I don't think playing shit gigs makes you a better band, but I think playing a lot of gigs makes you a tighter band.
Exactly, yeah.
Some great bands have missed that bit out and been great as well. Some bands basically start at ground zero and suddenly they're halfway up, and there's nothing wrong with that either. In fact, I'm pleased for him. I think it's good. A lot of pop bands who again, it's working in a different world as well, because not every piece of music is great is made by people who sit in transit vans going up and down the country. There's so many different ways you could end up making good music, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like the other extreme was the fact, we talked about the 80s then, but when the 80s came along, I mean, if you saw a pretty looking band and you saw that what you could get out of MTV, you could give them spending ridiculous amounts of money on videos, because you had all that exposure on television. And that's where the Spandau Ballets, the Duran Durans, and all those bands benefited from, again, back in the day, not like live work. I mean, they did it, but they had MTV as well.
But they had done it, hadn't they? That's the thing. They'd been in bands before. They had done the graph, but I'm not one of those people I don't think you have to pay your dues or do the graph.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
I hate all that, I think when I got to pop music, I thought you just made music. I didn't realize you had to slog about.
Well, going back to the likes of the great David Bowie and stuff, and he's not the only person to say it. I've heard Rick Rubin say it as well, is don't make an album for anybody, make an album for yourself.
It's true, but it's easy to say for David Bowie, isn't it? And I think I think when he did make albums for himself, nobody bought them, the original albums, which I mean, they're quaint and there's an attraction to them, like the kind of mad music hall records, aren't they?
Yeah.
at some point he obviously sat down with a manager and probably Tony Visconti and a whole bunch of other people to how can I make my songs more listenable? I think when it really worked with Bowie's, you know, I think Mick Ronson was a fucking diamond. You know, I think Mick
Oh,
Ronson.
genius.
I mean, Bowie would have brought a sketch of a song in, and Mick Ronson turned it into a rock and roll anthem, didn't he? You know, because he was so modest, he never blew his own trumpet enough. So I'll blow it for him now. I think for when Bowie was smart enough to realize what he needed to get into the mainstream. So there's still elements of that music hall thing all the way through his career, isn't there? You can still hear it, but he works with really good people who make it more listenable. So is he making a record he really wants to make, or is he smart enough to make it to something that other people want to make and keep enough of himself in?
Yeah. And you know the great thing about Bowie, and having had I use the word honor, you know, in every sense of the word, of going out on the road with him on the Earthling tour as his publicist and arranging all his radio and
That's a
TV.
good album, Earthling.
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
really
the thing
like
is, he was
it.
playing kind of small venues and stuff, you know. But the amazing thing is, I read an article, Mick Ronson, it was about 2 years after Bowie's death. And he said the great thing about David Bowie was he didn't micromanage. And what he did was, like, for instance, he chose me to be in his band. Do you not think that when I was left alone to do what I did best, which was keyboards, that I would be a better musician for being left alone? Instead of saying we need a bit more bass, we need a bit more this and that. And, you know, in a much lesser way, I felt that because, you know, when I was suggesting promotions to him, he was listening to my opinion. And he's saying to me, well, what do you think, Tony? I'm thinking, David Bowie's asking me what I think he should do. I said, David, you can do anything. And he said, well, yeah, I said, well, if I was going to do it, I'd do the guy with the BBC. And he said, well, if you think I should do it, I'd do it. He empowered people to bring out, and in my mini version, he brought out the best in me.
I think a really good artist. I mean, I think all artists are more than just, you know, a solo or a band. So I always think
Yeah.
like Joy Division was not a 4-piece band; it was a 14-piece band. Rob Gretton, Tony Wilson, Pete Saville, Martin
Yeah.
Hannah, they're all in the band, you know, in a sense. It's not Ian Curtis had the vision. Without Ian Curtis, none of this would happen. But all the surrounding musicians, artists, people like Tony Wilson just gobshiting it out there brilliantly, all key players in the whole thing. And Bowie knew that, you know, he knew it's not. I mean, sometimes you're stuck and you have to DIY it, and it's just you on your own, and you can learn it, you can work it out. But to really get through, to really make it work, Bowie knew this. You have to work with the best, and also you have to listen to people as well. And you can never know everything. There's no such thing as an expert. You know, the music scene changes all the time. It fluctuates. It goes in different ways. It's never set in stone. So Bowie was always smart enough to listen to all the other music that was going on, listen to what all the other people were doing, across loads of different fields as well. I don't think he spent all day thinking about music. You know, there's those brilliant quotes about the internet from him as well. You know, he talked about the internet being the future.
He saw it way ahead of anyone in the record industry.
And he understood business. I mean, he switched on to everything. And I think all the best artists have to be switched on to everything, don't they? You know, I think you can't be, you know, the worst artists are the ones who they're obsessed with one band and they copy that band and that's it, you know.
And a lot of that happens, you know, and that happens a lot with
again, you know, if it makes them happy, who am I to argue with it? You know,
no, but it's an interesting conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think probably the most visionary stuff's made by people who really switched on to everything. And they're often, even if you don't like their music, they're fascinating people. So someone like Grimes at the moment, and I did quite like her music, but I really like her interviews. And sometimes
Sorry, who was that?
Grimes, you know, went out with the Elon Musk boo hiss.
Oh, right. I don't know. I didn't know that.
But she's really interesting. Sometimes she talks bollocks and she's really out of her depth. And I think that's great. I like people like that as well. They're prepared to jump in with 2 feet and just talk about stuff that they don't really know much about, but they're fascinated by. That's great. And sometimes she poses really interesting points and questions, and she's running to AI in the future and things like that. And I think her interviews are really fascinating. You know,
you see, you've actually hit the nail on the head there, because I always think that the most interesting with a lot of musicians that get to the next level, so to speak, is the curiosity factor. And I mean, I remember seeing a quote from Bowie back in the day where he said, he wanted to be a millionaire by the time he was 30. He was saying that at like 17, 18, not for the money, but it would allow him the access all areas pass to explore other art forms, which was what he was into it for. It wasn't the money, but the money allowed him to do that.
Oh yeah,
He was a visionary in every sense of the word.
I think there's a truism with that, isn't there? You know, what if you have money, you have space to create. And
Exactly, yeah.
I think all artists, I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's not about, when you're a kid, everyone goes, think you'll ever get on top of the pops? People always used to say that. I think not a chance, the kind of music we're making. All we want is a little space where we can be creative, and but then again, that's a luxury, isn't it? Most people in the world can't even eat, and you're asking not just to eat, but have some space to let alone to indulge in your mad art.
Yeah, and even Bowie is. I mean, you talk about Bowie and the people around him. I mean, there was also the Tony DeFries period where that didn't go well, and when Ziggy exploded, he didn't realize that he was paying for all the kind of breast enlargements for PAs behind the desk in a office in Tokyo and offices all over the world and first class travel. He didn't understand then that was recoupable. He was behind on his rent in a flat in London at that time.
Well, but did they need that bit as well? I mean, who knows? Maybe the Tony DeFries model, which is the opposite of the punk model, was basically to make your artist look like a superstar, even though no one knew the fuck they were. So Bowie was always in limos, 5-star hotels, and they created this smoke screen where he seemed like he was a superstar. And then people started to believe he was a superstar. But the lucky bit was he created the music that actually soundtrack being a superstar.
You
So
say exactly what I say. I say the thing is, what I like in the music industry is I love the hype, but I love the hype when it's a Ziggy Stardust. You perpetuate this myth of this alien rock star and build up this buzz, but when he turns up on stage, he's every bit as good as he should be. Because you
yeah,
can't fool the audience. Because if you come on and you're not everything you're expected to be, it's like it's not going to work, and you just look like a con act. But that for him was perfect.
but I think the hype can be an art form as well. The Beatles
Yeah,
hype. I mean,
yeah.
people always sneer at
They
bands
were
being
first
hype
boy band, weren't they?
in a sense.
Yeah,
People always sneer at stuff, call stuff hype, but what they mean is I don't like this music. So why are they popular? That's what people mean when they say hype. But everything's a hype. Even like the Velvet Underground was a hype. They were working with Andy Warhol. They weren't like a bunch of street kids from Kansas City just making genius music. They were in the middle of the art scene in New York with every single door open to them. It's like they could afford to indulge themselves, and they indulge themselves brilliantly. And the Beatles, when they landed in America, a lot of those kids at the airport screaming were paid $1 each to turn up at the airport and scream. And they gave away 50,000 free Beatle wigs, didn't they, to people in New York and things. So it's a brilliant hype, and but again, if you've got the stuff to deliver, you get given the space, and if you can occupy the space, that's where the brilliance is in pop culture, isn't it?
exactly, exactly. So it's interesting to hear what you were saying about venues. It's very encouraging as well because I kind of feel for bands that don't know which way to turn.
But yeah, but I'm not saying it's easy for them, but I'm saying it's not like they've all closed.
Yeah. I wonder if the same applies to America. I'll have to do some research and find out because I know a lot of bands that, obviously when I spent a lot of time in Florida, a lot of people were just playing beach bars doing Buffett cover versions for tips. Well, that's not really artist development. It's kind of thinking I don't have to get a proper job.
I think New York, it's getting pushed out, isn't it? Because everything's turned to flats and that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you go to Brooklyn, then you go further out of Brooklyn because it's moving again. So that's what you'll find. But weirdly, in Manchester, it's still in the centre. Northern Quarter's got loads of little venues, like the Castle, Gulliver's. There's. Tons of venues.
So
But
you go
Manchester's
out
very
yourself and see a
easy.
lot of bands?
Yeah. Go last weekend. Last Saturday, I managed to go to 3 gigs in one night. It's one because that's the great thing about Manchester. Even though it's like a massive city now, it's not the city you left. Then it was decaying, almost like a backwater
Yeah, yeah.
soundtrack. Now it's a thrusting top 10 European city. With a massive skyline to match. But the centre's is about 3 miles across, but probably most of the venues are compressed into an area about a mile apart.
Mm.
So, and I cycle everywhere, so I can just hop from one gig to another on my bike.
Oh, that's great.
I was
Yeah.
looking at him on his bike and thinking, well, look at you fucking walking around the rain.
Yeah.
Or
How
you,
much is your Uber going home?
I know your car, you can't park. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because, like, but it's funny because I was reading about, Andy Spinoza's book about,
It's brilliant in
Manchester.
the book, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I had Andy on the podcast, and the thing is, I sort of photographed myself in my van, ABC Records at the time, at Pandemonium Records in Didsbury,
Oh, yeah.
and
I remember that.
I
Yeah.
didn't, all this talk about Manchester being a shithole. Well, so was New York in the 70s. It's dreadful.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
thing
they're
is,
very similar,
there's a
weren't they?
photograph of me, John, outside my van, and I'm smiling like this, with my arms folded. And I've only noticed this over the last 2 years. Behind me was like buildings they'd knocked down. They hadn't even cleared the bricks up. And I thought, oh my God, I was 20. I was in the music business. I never saw that. I was in
Yeah.
another world. All my friends from school and stuff had proper jobs. My job was an extension of my hobby. But looking at that now, and then when I hear the skyscrapers, when I arrived for the Piccadilly reunion, I took a walk downtown with a friend of mine who's does cultural stuff in Finland, and we got as far as the Wellington down at the old Shude Hill thing. The old what was it? Not Shude Hill. Anyway, the pub. And I thought, well, hang on, I've been to New York. I don't need to see millions of skyscrapers. Let's go and have a beer. And it's like, wow. But when I was staying with family in Cheadle-Hulme, and instead of getting the train in, I got the bus. And I was like a kid, John. Went upstairs. There was one person sat in the back row. I was on the front, and I was going through Didsbury and Fallowfield. And then it started to like not look like Manchester. But on the way in, going through Russia and things, I was one of those Curry Mile people back in the day type thing. But everywhere's changed, I suppose. But yeah, it's funny they don't have like all those skyscrapers. I mean, it must be a noisy place to live with the venues as well.
Yeah, well, it is, but a lot of skyscrapers are built on the other side of the city, So it's I always think this because I'm actually looking at them now at my window because I can see them from Hume. I think if you've never been to Manchester before, you'd actually think that was the centre, but it's on the edge of the centre. It's
Oh,
all
right.
the vibey, noisy bits, the northern quarter, which is the other side of town. So these are all built on just the back end of Hume, Castlefield, down there.
Yeah.
People go, people my age always moan about them. They go, they've ruined that part of town. So it was a car park. There was nothing there for years.
Mm.
And
I,
I
I
mean,
think I've
nobody ever
drive
went there.
round
It's
and
only
look
me
at.
that ever went down there. It was my shortcut into town.
Yeah.
It's still there, the shortcut. It's just got big 60-story blocks on either side of it.
Well, that's great, John. We're just about to, the clock's about to roll out. So all I can say is thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thanks,
I
Steve.
really look forward to, well, you're not really hard to edit. So it's just a case of listening back to it and uploading it. Thanks a million. And we will get together for maybe another one soon.
Yes, definitely. That'd be great. Yeah.
So that's the end of that, John. So
Okay. Yeah.
just before I'll stop the recording. Yeah, when you've got time, I'd love to have a chat off air. Because the thing is, when you've got anything going, like if you've got something to promote, I'm quite happy for you to come back on here and talk about that and promote that at the same time to kind of my people. So, because I'm always after like, good content that's current but also like, we're not a history lesson. We just go back at certain things that had an effect on us, because I remember pivotal moments in my life being defined by music, I mean, as we speak now, I just uploaded, I met him at the Piccadilly reunion when I came over, and I interviewed Andy Peebles talking about the last
John
interview
Lennon.
with John Lennon, and
It
I mean,
wasn't the last though, was it?
well, no, it wasn't. And he was
Yeah.
the person that exposed that. It was the last kind of established interview with the journalist, so to speak, because the other things were kind of more kind of smaller magazines or something. I don't know. But the amount of time that he spent with him and everything was phenomenal. But that's kind of a life-changing event because we all remember where we were when John Lennon died. And I don't think there's anything like music to take you back to a time and a place,
No, that's a very generational defining moment. And even right in the middle of punk, where I haven't really listened to any Beatles records for ages, it was such a shock, wasn't it?
Well, there's going to be more to come. I mean, Bob Dylan is actually 84 today. And,
No. And
Dylan
Keith
and
Richards is still going. It's
yeah,
insane.
exactly. Well, Keith
Yeah.
Richards, like, he kind of, his past death is kind of eternal, it's kind of like, how can you die? Keith Richards, we've got through everything,
He's never looked healthier.
He's looking well, actually. You're right. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. But then again, it's kind of like the sad thing is that, all the people that we grew up on and things are all getting, I mean, Steve Albini the other week, all these people that
Well,
were
that was a
always
massive
there.
shock. I mean, I've known
Yeah. I didn't
Steve.
know him, but I knew he was
I've known
important.
him since 1986. We were the first band to go and record with him outside his own bands. We went to his house and recorded an album in his cellar in 1987. So we were there before the Pixies and all the other bands.
Yeah.
So I knew Steve. I was in touch with him all the time, and yeah, I was fairly close to him, so that was a bit of like fuck.
Yeah, incredibly sad. But you know, unfortunately, a lot of the people around us, John. I mean, we've all got less in front of us than we've had behind us. But you know, let's get on with it and enjoy life. Right, sir. I'm going to call it a day then. Have a think about when you've got. I don't want to hustle you with emails and this and that, but when you've got a minute, we can jump on a
Well,
WhatsApp
have
or
you
we can
got a
do
minute
this.
now? How much time you got on this call?
Well, the thing is, this is going to run out. I can call you back on this in like 5 minutes if you want. I just
Yeah,
go and
do that. Let's get it done. So at least we
Oh,
got.
that'd be great. Are you sure you've got
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
I love you, man. That's great. Hang in there.
All
I'll
right.
be back. I've just got
Okay.
to let this download first. Okay, mate.
That's cool.
Back
Yeah,
shortly. I'll
speak
send
about
you
10 minutes.
another invite as well.
Yeah, but be about 10 minutes, I think.
10
So
minutes, great. I'll get a brew. Cheers, mate.